Okay, thank you, all of you who are joining us online. Welcome. It's going to be an interesting class tonight because it's a skeleton crew here. I think I might change up our closing with like the male-female groups and just because it's going to be hard to split the people that are online. Yeah. We will just be open and bold and talk about everything straight up.
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's start with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you have given us, all of the gifts and the graces that you have sent to us in our lives. We thank you for caring about our well-being, for loving us and caring about our good, and setting up a world for us to live in and live in well. Open our minds and our hearts to know and to love your law, to know and to love you, the giver of the law. Keep us faithful to you always. And we ask this as we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, it's going to be really odd teaching to a computer screen, so I'm just going to look at you guys.
You can spread out too if you want.
What? Just spread out, yeah. Is everyone's Thanksgiving good? Yeah, that's good. Throwing myself a small pity party. I spent it alone because I was quarantining.
Oh,
my mom tested positive for COVID, and I happened to be with her when she started experiencing symptoms, so that my life went on shutdown right before Thanksgiving. So it was hard, but it was good because Josh Applegate, our campus minister, our director of campus ministry here, shared something when he was quarantining, when he had COVID, that really helped me keep my sanity during that time. And it was a monk in Italy who shared, like years ago when Josh was in Italy visiting, a monk said to him, if I can't find happiness in my cell, because a monk's room is called his cell, if I can't find happiness in my cell, then where can I find it? And so, as I was sitting there locked up in my room, like trying to manage like roommates not wanting to get COVID, and then me not being sure whether I had it or not. So I just kind of quarantined in my room, and then that was my constant phrase that I told myself, I need to find happiness in my cell. Finding it in my cell. If I can't be happy here, then where am I going to find it? So, my little Thanksgiving tidbit. Okay, tonight's class is going to be very heavy hitting. It's going to be covering a lot of very big topics. And so, there is a no holds barred on any topic tonight. So, be prepared to ask your questions. If you are online, send a direct message through Ring Central, and I will check them during the break and then periodically throughout the evening, so that way we can answer any questions that you have if you have any. So just type it directly into the group chat in Ring Central. Okay. So, morality. I picked a saint that struggled with morality a lot. Saint Mary of Egypt. She, in today's day and age, would be called a nymphomaniac. She loved sex. She was not a prostitute. She was emphatic about that. She was not a prostitute because she refused to accept money for what she did. She lived like mid 300s to late 300s, early 400s. We know about her story because a monk, Saint Sophronius, happened to be wandering in a desert during Lent and stumbled across this shriveled old woman. And she was completely naked, so he covered her with his cloak. And then he asked her, it's like, we're in the desert. What are you doing here? You're this little old woman. What are you doing here? And she's like, I've been living my life in penance. Can I tell you my story? So she starts telling her story. And she didn't give much background about her childhood, but she said that from a very young age she became sexually active and grew to love it. And became, in a sense, what we would say in modern terms, addicted to it. So she just lived that lifestyle and everything that went along with it. One day, and I want to say that she was in her late teens or early 20s, she was living in Europe at the time, in Rome, I believe, somewhere in Italy. She saw a ship full of men getting ready to depart to go to Jerusalem for a holy pilgrimage. And she's like, a ship full of men, I like that. So she hops on. By the time they reached their destination, she had systematically slept with every single man on board, almost. So this was the lifestyle that she was leading. When she got off the ship in Jerusalem, she sees this massive crowd of people going to a church. And she's like, okay, I'm kind of bored. I'm new to the city. I don't know what I'm going to do here. I just kind of got on the boat on a whim. And I'll probably earn myself some money and then head back. So she follows the crowd out of boredom and gets to the door of the church. It was the Feast of the Holy Cross, which is in September. And so she goes, she tries to go up to the church, and she sees people going inside, doing their prostrations, saying their prayers, and she sees an icon of Mary holding the baby Jesus. And out of curiosity, she tries to go in to the church. She says in her accounting to Saint Sophronius, she could not go in. There was an invisible force holding her back that said, that could not let her go in. And at that point, she had a sudden, what we would call epiphany conversion moment, realized what she was doing with her life, consciously rejected it, made some kind of act of penance, and then gave up that lifestyle completely and fled into the desert and lived the rest of her life in the desert. And so when St. Sophronius finds her, she's in her 60s at this point, so she gave up that lifestyle in her mid-20s. And she's in her 60s at this point. She's lived completely alone by herself. Her clothes have disintegrated off her body, which is why she was naked when he found her. She said, this is what, I love her story so much because she has a massive conversion experience. She gives up her lifestyle, but she says the struggle with sin never left her. That there would be days where she wanted to drink so bad that she would just be driven to distraction for days on end. And she wasn't an alcoholic anymore. She hadn't touched liquor for however many years. But she was driven to distraction to the point where she had to throw herself in the hot sand to get herself to stop thinking about it. That she would be riddled with all of the songs that they used to sing in the taverns and the bars, and that she couldn't get them out of her head, even though she hadn't heard them in 30 years. And so for her, a conversion experience wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't an immediate, oh, my life is so easy, living the good and moral life is so great. It was a struggle and it was a battle. And she fought it, and she won. St. Sophronius says that when she appeared to him, it was Lent, and so back in that day and age, Lent meant that if you were in the monastery, you actually left the monastery for the whole Lent. For 40 days, you left the monastery, and you foraged for survival out in the desert, because most monasteries were set up around the desert. So you foraged for survival in the desert, and if you saw someone from your community, you didn't even wave. You walked the other way. You weren't allowed to meet with anyone for 40 days. And then you would come back and celebrate Easter. And so he's debating with himself, should I even be talking to this person? And she's like, wait, I haven't seen another human being in 40 years. I have not received the Eucharist in 40 years. Can you please bring me the Eucharist next year? Because his 40 days was about up in the desert, and then she wasn't going to be able to find him. They weren't going to be able to find each other. So they agreed that 1 year from that point, they would meet and he would bring her the Eucharist. So the next year he goes, brings her the Eucharist. This is where there's a style of saintly biography called hagiography. which borders on the fantastical and miraculous, and you can choose to believe it or not. It's cool if it's real. It's not going to hurt you if it's not. But it says that when she saw him, there was a river between them. She walked across the water to meet him, bringing her the Eucharist. And so he gives her the Eucharist, and then she's grateful. They exchange some pleasantries and then part ways. He comes back to find her a few days later to find her dead. So she died after having received the Eucharist for the first time in 40 years. And then another part of the fantastical part of the story of her life, which, God's the God of all nature. I don't understand why it couldn't be true. The dirt where she died was too hard for him to try and bury her. But a lion came up and dug a part of the ground, and then he was able to bury her because a lion came up and dug away part of the ground. So, Saint Mary of Egypt. Pretty phenomenal saint. Even if the fantastical parts at the end of her life aren't true. So, it's not Saint Sophronius, sorry, I misspoke. It's Saint Zosimus. Saint Sophronius she told the story to Saint Zosimus. Saint Zosimus told him Saint Sophronius who wrote it down. That's the chain of events. So, story, a couple of degrees of separation from the person and the person writing it down. But anyway, Saint Mary of Egypt. Questions? Okay. Moving on then to morality. Before Carlos and I are going to get up and then just talk about the moral issues and the church's stance on moral issues. But before I do that, I want to set it up with what is a moral action? Why does the church even care about this? And how do we determine what is a good moral act versus a bad moral action? How do we determine this? What's the rule and the standard that we use? So I feel like it's helpful to review some things. First of all, that humanity, as I've been hammering from the beginning, is made in the image and likeness of God. We cannot forget that. We are destined for greatness. That is what we are made for. But as we saw right before Thanksgiving, we fell, and we fell hard. In that fall, our intellect, our will were darkened and removed from God. It is harder to make choices, and good choices. I feel like this is not a newsflash to anyone. I think if you take one honest look at your life, you see that doing good things is hard to do sometimes. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what is the good thing. We need a guiding system to figure out, okay, I'm confused. Which way is the right way? We're made in the image and likeness of God. We're created for union with God. There's a relationship that's established. And in that, every relationship that we have has rules. I want you to think about if you are married or have dated, or the relationship that you have with your parents or your siblings or your friends. Any relationship that you have has a set of rules that you abide by. Let's take a simple friendship, for example. I am breaking the rules of my friendship if I go and I gossip about all the horrible things that my friend has done. That is breaking the rules of friendship.
What kind of horrible things?
Sally last week, totally. Did you hear what she said about you? You should have heard what Sally said about you. Totally gossiping. Or, Sally really had a drinking problem 10 years ago, and she's totally gotten over it now, but man, you should have seen her back then. And did you hear about all those little things that she did? That's breaking the rules of a friendship. You're not letting a person move on from their past, you're gossiping about them, you're digging up the negativity of their life, when really if you're their friend, you can call them out on it, hey Sally, I noticed you have a drinking problem, can I get you some help? That's constructive friendship, but destructive friendship, I'm breaking the rules of friendship. Very, very obvious one. If I'm married, do you cheat on your spouse? No. That is breaking the rules of a monogamous, committed relationship. When you get married, you enter into that set of rules. And if you have an adulterous affair with someone, you're breaking those rules. That's a universally acknowledged standard. And so every time we enter into a relationship, there's a how-to of a relationship. But now do you look at your spouse and be like, your rules are too defining. I think we need to be more open in our relationship with each other. You hear about those marriages. Do they last long? Not really. Those aren't realistic. And so, but do you look at your spouse and be like, your rules are too confining? No, you love the other person, and so you want to enter into something exclusive with them, and you abide by the rules. Sometimes it's not easy, but you still know that they're good. And sometimes they don't feel great either, but you still know that they're good. So, just setting up kind of the background of why is there a rule system in general? Because we're entering into a relationship with God. We're made for this unity. We're made for goodness. And if we have the capability of doing bad things, if we have the capability of turning away from that relationship, we need to know when we're turning away, when we're getting it right, and when we're getting it wrong. What's healthy for us in our relationship and what's damaging for us in our relationship. So, let's chat about free will. This is a big thing with the Catholic Church, that what makes a human being, that we have an intellect and a will, and that will is free. I am free to decide what I want to do with my life. But that freedom, according to the Catholic understanding, is a freedom to pursue the good. It is not freedom to do anything I want. That's something called license. License is the ability to do whatever you want. I have the freedom to go out there and kill someone on the street. But that's actually not what the Catholic Church would identify as true, authentic freedom. I have a license to do that. But my will isn't actually free to sin. My will is free to choose and do the good. That's the point. That's the goal. So I have this capacity within myself to choose a good and a not so good. If ever there is a choice between two things, there are many different kinds of choices. There can be between two equal goods. What do I want for dessert? Chocolate ice cream or chocolate chip cookies? Two equal goods, right? There's no problem with that, unless you're a diabetic. Don't. That's a choice between two. That's a choice between two equal bads. If I'm a diabetic, I shouldn't be having sugar. Let's go eat an apple instead. So the choice between chocolate chip cookie or chocolate ice cream, that's two bad choices, and then it's a moot point. The biggest example, I hate to bring this up, but was the last election. That for Catholics was two bad choices. I didn't have a good choice and a bad choice. I had two bad choices, realistically. Neither candidate is perfect. And so this is where morality comes into play. So when I'm presented with two bad choices, how do I make a good one? If I'm presented with a good choice and a bad choice, what's the obvious answer? You pick the good one. But sometimes the good choice doesn't seem as good, and sometimes the bad choice seems better. And so how do we figure that out? How do we figure out which choices are actually good for us and which ones are actually bad for us? And these play into, how do I have a healthy relationship with God? And how do I have a healthy relationship with myself and my neighbor? So, the point behind all of this, the point of the rules and laws, is so that we can enter into relationship in a healthy way. It's not to sit there and control and manipulate our lives. A lot of people the Catholic Church gets a bad rap because there are a lot of rules. There are a lot of them. But when you actually pause and look at why do these rules exist and what purpose do they serve, they're actually very fruitful and very beneficial. If you start looking into not just the rule, but why is this rule in place? What is it trying to do for me, for my life, for my relationship with God, for my relationship with myself, and my relationship with my neighbor? It's not that the Catholic Church is trying to control my actions. It's trying to set me up for success in my relationships. Nobody likes a failed relationship. And the Catholic Church is in the business of relationships because God started it first. God started it first. He wants us to be relational. And so, nobody likes a failed relationship. Great, let's give some guidelines on how to have a healthy relationship. the way I look at it, there are a couple of analogies that I like to share about rule structures and rule systems. There was an interesting case study. I don't know if I've ever seen the original, but I've seen it referenced lots of places, and I'm sure I can find the original if you guys really wanted me to. But there was a case study with children playing in a playground and different types of playgrounds and play environments. One gave the children free rein in a field next to the school building. Free rein. You could go anywhere you want. There's play structure, there's stuff everywhere. And then they put kids in a playground that had a fence around it, next to a school building. Which group of kids moved more freely? Like, most of us would think the kids in the field. It was actually the kids with the fence, because they knew the limit. They used the entire playground. They had freedom to go wherever they wanted and do whatever they wanted, and they felt comfortable with that freedom because they knew the limit. And this is true with just child psychology in general. Kids need boundaries, adults need boundaries. Boundaries is a good hot topic word in our day and age. Like, we've got to set good boundaries, people. This is a good thing. Boundaries are a good thing. Because it puts the limit of like, okay, if you step past this, you could be in danger. Because maybe that school is right next to a freeway. Maybe not. But there's another analogy that I like to use, and that is, anyone here play a musical instrument? Kind of, sort of. Have any of you ever seen someone who is an expert at a musical instrument just sit down and start playing? I've seen it a handful of times. Or maybe you've seen someone who's like, well, I don't know if Josh is watching, but like Josh, when he just sits down, he's just playing. How is he able to do that? Because he has mastery over the rules of music. And now he has complete freedom within the rules to make beauty. That's the point of it. The rules are there for us to create beautiful things with our lives, not to turn into a dumpster fire. You could have someone that has no musical knowledge whatsoever. They can sit down and they might be able to plunk out something nice. I remember doing that as a kid. I'd be like, Grandma, I'm going to play the piano. And as a grandmother, you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. But really, it is beautiful, but it's not. Like, I'm just sitting there banging on a piano. But then you put it in the hands of someone who has repetitiously learned the scales, playing up and down, and then you learn how to read music, and then you learn music theory, you learn all of the rules. But those rules then give you absolute freedom. And I like to say that this is the same with morality. That when we follow a structure within our lives, and when we abide by certain rules that we set for ourselves, and that God also sets with us, that gives us freedom to create beauty. Think of some of the most amazing people that you have met in your lives. Don't they all follow some kind of moral structure or code? Pretty much guarantee it. Whether they're Christian or not, they all follow some kind of structure or code. And so this is the Catholic claim then for morality. We have a structure or code so that we can create beauty. So that we have more freedom. I know exactly how I can live and live happily. Is it always rainbow and butterflies? No, it's not. But there's always an underlying happiness that I know I'm doing things right or trying to. I fail, but you try to. And if you fail, at least you know that you failed. Because there's nothing worse than being like, I thought I did that right, and then it ends up being an absolute failure. And you had no idea. I like knowing when I failed. It's not fun. But I infinitely prefer it to not knowing. So, case for moral structure. So free will, freedom, so criteria for morality. So when the Catholic Church looks at a human being doing a certain action, there are different criteria that we look at to determine whether or not the action is good or bad. I have to give this caveat, although it seems obvious, but I feel like I need to state it. When I am judging an action, that does not necessarily mean that I'm judging the person. I can call someone's action bad without saying the person is bad. Our society has forgotten how to do that. we now equate actions and identity with the person, and that is not true. And so we need to reclaim that I am not merely the sum of my actions. I am so much more than that. And so I can and do look at people and say, this is a good action, but that does not make you a good person. And I can look at a bad action and say, yep, that's bad, but that does not make you a bad person. Good people can do bad actions, and bad people can do good actions. Your actions are not your identity. So just to clarify that, because when we talk about morality, this is where the church is coming from. We can look at someone acting and say, this is not good for you. This is not good for the person that you're trying to love. This is not going to be good for the relationship that you have with God. But this does not make you a bad person.
So what's the Bible passage that is always used, and for why she said what she said? It's a very common thing of, doesn't the Bible say X, Y, and Z? What is the normal thing that people use? Because you're going to hear it, and people are quoting the Bible when she gives that example. So what's the you don't have to tell me like Matthew 17. You just tell
17.
No. I'll just close that out. You don't have to. But what's the actual words?
I think I know which one you're getting at, but I'm not sure.
Huh?
I think it's judge not, lest you be judged.
Yeah. And then
Judge not, lest you be judged. That's often thrown out.
That is often thrown out, and one of the prime reasons why I had to foot stomp that, because they're gonna pull that out of the Bible and they're gonna misuse it. They're gonna throw away the true freedom to use that and squander it. Or they're gonna quote Pope Francis when he goes, "Who am I to judge?" And a lot of people will misuse these, abuse these quotes to give license to acting unjustly, acting immorally. And that is probably, that's a great foot stop. If you become Catholic, if you are Catholic, if you haven't already encountered it, you will. And if you haven't encountered it, you're going to encounter it several times more.
Yeah, and so that verse, judge not lest you be judged.
You don't have to.
That idea is, judging someone's eternal destiny is above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But if I say, the stove's hot, don't touch it, and then you go and touch it and I say, if you touch the stove, you're going to get burned. Am I making a claim on their eternal burndom? No, I'm telling them the natural consequence of their action. And so I can, and I have the rational capability, I am a rational, functioning human being. I can say, if you keep doing that, that is going to be harmful for you, and it's not going to end well. And especially if God gives me enlightenment into certain areas, because it's kind of hard to figure it out for ourselves. If he comes and he says, through scripture especially, don't do this is bad for you. And I say to someone else, don't do that, that's bad for you. Am I judging them? No. I'm just sharing what I know. Now, I can be wrong. Believe me, there are plenty of Catholics, Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, whatever. It doesn't take a religion to get it wrong. There are plenty of people that can and do get this wrong. They start judging a little bit too much or pushing the envelope a little bit too far. Leaving those aside, if you have a normal person who is striving for holiness, who looks at someone else's life and says, that might actually not be great for you. That might be worth listening to and figuring out, I wonder why they think that's not great for me. Okay. Just like you would tell an alcoholic, please don't drink, that's going to destroy your liver. That's natural consequence. So if I tell someone, hey, I actually know the Bible pretty well, and God says that if you do X, Y, and Z, you're hurting your relationship with him, and if you hurt your relationship with him, which is what we're going to be talking about next week, what happens when you have a good relationship, a mediocre relationship, and a bad relationship? That's heaven, purgatory, hell. What happens, what are the spectrums of relationships that we can have with God? And so if I tell people, hey, you're destroying your relationship with God, by doing this because he's told us and he gives us reasons and we've kind of figured it out with science other ways. Great, like, please stop doing this. It's not going to end well. Am I making an eternal judgment on their soul? No, but I am sharing like, hey, I kind of know that this might not end well. And so the judge not lest you be judged is definitely like misused today, but it does have a point. Like, I am allowed to judge a person's action. I'm not allowed to make a judgment on their eternal destiny. That's above my pay grade. And even then, we should be careful in judging one another's actions, as you'll see when I go through the criteria, because there are criteria that we don't know about. And so I can say, it appears like you're doing something X that could be bad. Or it could appear that someone's doing something really good. Like maybe someone's donating millions of dollars every year to charity, but that's because they've set up a secret hedge fund that they're siphoning money off into and an offshore account, and they're embezzling money from the charity. On the outside, it looks great, but it's actually not a good action. So we need to be careful and discerning when we go into judging actions, and we can't just do it like, this is bad, that's bad, that's bad. There needs to be judgment and charity involved, charity meaning love. So first of all, we need to talk about a human act versus a non-human act. A non-human act are typical like actions that we actually would share with, to a certain degree, animals, or certain actions that have become so habitual that it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I would say going to the bathroom is not a human act. Like, every animal does it. Like, that's not a moral action. It's not a human action. I would say opening the door for someone as they're going into a building, that's a human action. I'm doing it out of consideration for the other. That's something that is uniquely human. I don't know, Carlos, do you have any other examples of examples of human, non-human action?
So to me, what she's saying is anything that doesn't require a whole lot of using that word consideration, any thought or anything. It's not like breathing.
Breathing's not a human action.
Like, it's just what you do. But anytime that you have to choose, like use your will to make a choice, then the other criteria that she's going to talk about will come into play.
Yeah. So that's the first thing, is that we're not here to judge non-human actions. And that's not our place to. Like, if you want to go to the bathroom in a particular way, not my place to judge. Like, I'm using like really basic examples because like there are actually very few actions that are non-human actions. There are very few. And even the non-human actions can become human actions because I attach my will to them and because I actually desire some kind of good to come out of it. So, example, like, when could going to the bathroom become a human action? Actually, a priest asked me this once. He was like, Jessica, do you pray when you go to the bathroom? He was like, it seems like it's kind of inappropriate to pray while you go to the bathroom. I'm like, why not? Can't you pray anywhere? Like, did I just turn that experience that's just kind of normal and mundane into a human action that actually has a good benefit? I could choose to do something or not choose to do something while I do this action. Yeah. So you can take non-human actions and make them human. That's the beauty of being a human being. So before I get bogged down into this, let's look at the other criteria though. So when I look at an action, I have to look at the object. What is it that I'm choosing? What is it that the person is choosing? What are they choosing to do? What are they choosing to think? What are they choosing to say? How are they choosing to be? The object. What is their goal, their outcome? That's what the object is. So if a human being has an action that has an object at the end of it, a goal that they are striving for, that is one criteria of a human action.
Murder.
Well, let's not get into specifics right now, okay? Let's just break down the nuts and bolts of a human action. The second part of a human action is the intention. So not only do I have the object, what I'm doing, I have to have the why am I doing it? What is my reasoning behind this? And then the third criteria are the circumstances. What is the stuff surrounding my decision, the underlying stuff that affects how I go about pursuing my end? I have my end, I have my reason why I'm moving towards that end. Now, how am I going about doing it? So, really dumb, simple example. Let's break it down. I'm saving a cat in a tree. What is my object to save the cat? Is the object good? Yes. So far, so good. Now, because we now base, is the object good? Or is my intention good? And are my circumstances good? If it meets all three criteria, it is a good action. This is a morally good action. If it fails in any one of those criteria, it ceases to be a morally good action. It can become ambiguous or downright wrong, bad, evil. It can be an evil moral action. But there's a gray area of like morally ambiguous to bad. It ceases to be just a good action. Okay? So, saving a cat in a tree. So far, so good. My intention, my object is good. I'm saving the cat. Check. Why am I saving the cat? What is my intention? It is my sister's beloved cat, and she would be deeply saddened if it, got stuck in the tree and died for whatever reason. Good intention. Great. Check. Circumstances. I use a ladder, and I climb up there, and I get the cat, and it's great. Everything's happy. Good. Good moral action. Saved a cat from a tree. Now let's change up some of the variables. Let's leave the intention as good. Because if the object. If the object is bad, I think we can all see you cannot choose a bad end, even with the best of intentions, even with the right circumstances. The end never justifies the means. I cannot choose something that is morally bad as an object. Ever. We'll talk about this with specific examples later, because this is where people are like, but what if? What if my intentions are good? What if my circumstances are all perfect? No, it's not okay. It's still not okay. We go into the morally gray area. We can't necessarily say that it's outright bad, but we definitely go into the morally gray area. Example, Robin Hood. He's a morally gray person. Because what is the object that he is doing? He is stealing money that does not belong to him. He has great intentions. Circumstances are a little iffy because he's going around and possibly, especially in the movies, he's killing people. But his circumstances are a little bit iffy. His intentions are good, but the object of what he's doing is bad. Morally gray. Morally gray. So, let's go back to the saving the cat. I save the cat because my neighbor's bird keeps chirping incessantly and I just want it to die. And this cat will kill the bird. Great! That's why I'm rescuing the cat. Is my intention good? No. So therefore my action is bad. Me saving the cat from the tree is a bad action. Externally, for me, it's a bad action for me. Externally we can say, yes, saving the cat from the tree is just a good idea. But for me, it's a morally bad action. It's no matter how much good the object is, the reason why I'm doing it is bad, and therefore it is bad for me to do it. Does that make sense? You can have people do all sorts of good things in the world, but have bad intentions. And that, the good thing is still there and it's still happening, but it's bad for them. Does this make sense? It's hurting them. Okay, so let's say I leave the cat in the tree, or the cat's in the tree. I have a good intention. It's my sister's beloved cat. But I live in a unique forest, and this is the last tree of an endangered species, and I chop it down. Crazy example, I know, but my circumstances aren't great. Or let's say I get up to the tree and I want to save my sister's beloved cat, and I kick it out of the tree. No, the circumstances of how I go about doing the saving are bad. So, making a little bit of sense on how we judge a morally good action. You have the object, the intention, and the circumstances, and they all have to be good for an action to be good. Does that make sense? Questions?
I want to add something real quick.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times when Catholics do stuff like this, like an examination of conscience, which is almost kind of like the meta version of what we're doing right now, we get pegged to have this stereotype of Catholic guilt. You guys ever hear the term Catholic guilt? And some people, they legit have Catholic guilt to where the word scrupulosity comes into play, and they're overly scrupulous, and they're like, am I sleeping the right way, Father? Should I be sleeping on the right side of the bed? Because that's where Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. And I'm like, goodness gracious, you're taking this way too far. But in these circumstances, when we talk about circumstances, I want to highlight something from the Catechism, where you don't want to get too lost in the weeds, that even after you realize you're wrong, that you don't go and pursue God's mercy. So here's something, like when you make a mistake, know that you're not perfect. Okay? When you make a mistake, when you sin, you are not a perfect human being. So that's why we have confession. Which paragraph? This is paragraph 1754 regarding circumstances. And this isn't a get out of jail free.
Catechism, paragraph, which one?
1754.
1754. Okay.
So this isn't a get out of jail free card by any stretch of the imagination, but this is an exercise in humility and patience. Circumstances of themselves cannot change the moral quality of acts themselves. So bottom line, like she said, you have to have all three. It's not like 2 out of 3 or 2.5 out of 3 and it's still good to go. It could still be a bad act. But that does not necessarily mean you are fully culpable for the wrongdoing that you acted upon. Like say, for example, duress, right? Like say, for example, and again, using cockamamie examples, someone has a gun to your head and they're forcing you to do something. It's not your full will that you're acting upon. Yeah, you should probably not do whatever it is that they're forcing you to do. But at that point, all that stress in that circumstances, all those different things can still make you not make a completely free choice. So that's another aspect of circumstance. Mm-hmm. That action that you performed is still morally bad. Your culpability for it probably is diminished to a certain degree. So, still go to confession. Just don't beat yourself up to the point where you don't go to confession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so circumstance, there's, just to give you guys a little bit of perspective, I took a whole semester-long course in morality and moral theology. It was actually 2 semesters, so a whole year of dedicated to this, and I'm summarizing it in 10 minutes. So there's a whole lot to circumstance. Just to clarify, we talk about this more when we talk about sin, concretely, our individual sins. We talk about this during our session on confession. Things that are done accidentally or out of mistake are not necessarily sins, because my will is not attached to them and my knowledge is not attached to them. If I'm mistaken and I act, what I could do, the object is still bad. I could be doing something bad. My intention might be good though, and my circumstances might be okay. And if my intention is good and my circumstances are okay and I am mistaken and I believe that the object that I'm choosing is good, this happens a lot. I believe that the object that I'm choosing is a good one. That means that, but just because I believe that the stove isn't on and therefore I go and touch it and it actually is, do I still get burned? Yes. And so we actually still do harm our relationship with God. We harm ourselves spiritually when we do these things. But God doesn't sit there and say, wow, you're screwed, to hell with you. It's there is a lessening of what Carl said, culpability, my ownership of my sin. Did I do this bad action because I wanted to sin and I wanted my way? No, I didn't. And so God looks and there's more mercy there. We still hurt. I deal with people, I work with people all the time that have been doing harmful things in their lives, and it's still carrying effects even though they didn't realize how bad this was for their lives. Like a simple example is like a drug addict. Like you get into it and you test it out because maybe it's fun. Maybe you do that just on, like I'm not gonna get addicted one time, it's fine. Let's just give it a try. They think it's gonna be fun. Their friends are encouraging them to do it. Like their object is bad. Their intention, I just wanna have fun. Just wanna have fun. It's not a bad intention, right? Circumstances, hanging out with my friends. They're encouraging me to do it, and look, everyone else seems to be doing fine. But you see how that would have a long-term ramification, even though they don't believe it's bad for them at the time. That's going to have a long-term ramification in their lives that they're going to have to be freed from later regardless. You can go into something with the best of intentions and the best of circumstances, but if you're choosing the wrong thing, it's still going to hurt. So we're going to talk about that in depth with the different things that we're going to cover because most of the hot button moral issues that the church covers today is over this, the object. The world disagrees with the church that the object that they're choosing is wrong. The church says, no, the thing that you are choosing, you may have the best of intentions and you may have great circumstances, but you cannot change the fact that what you are choosing is going to hurt you. And so that's where a lot of the tension is between the church and the world. Okay, additional criteria. Moral acts, good moral acts are always ordered towards a good end. They always have a good object. I think I've hammered this one enough. It doesn't matter any of the others, the circumstances or your intention. If the object is not good, your action is not good, period. Okay? I'm not going to sit there and say it's outright evil. Don't try and paint this black and white. Morality is not black and white. As much as we would like it to be, the world is easier if it is. But it is not. As much as I would like to, then on the flip side, well, then that's evil. There's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. And then the ends never justify the means. This happens so much. You have a good object, but if my intention isn't good and the circumstances aren't good, I will not be able to make my action completely good. It will be tainted. There can be a mostly good action. And let's be real, this is most of human actions. Even saints, they have good ends, but then their intention isn't purified. And then even then, it's like, just to clarify, to the outside world, because I think you will all know as soon as I say this, to the outside world it looks good and it's fine. But on the inside, you know that your intention wasn't the greatest, because only you and God can judge your intention. And so on the inside, you know that your intention wasn't the greatest. Or you know that better circumstances were maybe at your disposal, but you were just a little bit too lazy and you didn't pick the best circumstances or the best method. I think that's where our judgment comes in a little bit more. And to the outside world, it looks great. And that's when you get people saying, oh, you're just being too hard on yourself. No, I know my intention and I know my circumstances and they weren't squeaky clean. Now, am I beating myself up for them? No. But do you see where I'm going with that? An example from my own life. This is something I have to battle a little bit. I've gotten better at it in more recent years, but I used to struggle with it a lot. I sing. Most of you who know me and have seen me at Mass, I sing for Mass. And I'm not a bad singer. I will admit that. I'm not half bad. But there are times when I get up in front of the congregation and I start singing, what's my intention? Well, going back to What's my intention? Why am I doing what I'm doing? The best intention, because I love the Lord and I want to worship him with the gifts that he has given me, and using the gifts that I have and acknowledging them that they're good and true, using them to help other people also worship. That's the best of intention. Most of the time I'm able to manage that to some degree. But there are other times where I'm like, you know what? I've really wanted to impress this person for a while. They've never heard me sing. I'll do it extra good today. Like, is that the best of intentions? No. Do the people sitting in the pews know that that's what I'm thinking? No, they don't. But I just tainted my good act of worship just a little bit. Does it remove the fact that I'm doing a good thing and getting up and sharing my gifts and talents with the church? No, it doesn't remove that at all. But it taints it a little bit for the good that it could do for me and the good that it could do for my relationship with God. So a concrete example of like where an intention could be like, it's mostly good. But I don't look at myself when I notice that going through my mind and I actually buy into it, because that's the other thing, is that sometimes the thought floats through my mind, kind of like a little banner going across the bottom of your screen, and then I just let it keep going. And at that point, the Catholic Church says that we would call that something like a temptation. That's not a sin. That's not a bad moral action. If it's almost like the bottom of the banner going across your screen, just let it keep going, and then let it go, and then that's not a sin. That's a temptation. That's not bad in and of itself. But it's when that banner starts repeating on loop. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I really did want to impress that person. Yeah. Or you know what? I know I sound really good when I sing this song, even though I know this song is more appropriate for Mass today. Like that sort of thing. Like, no, then I'm making it more about me than about worshiping God. And when I engage that thought, that's when we say, now your will's attached to it. Now what you want to do is attached to this. So, getting into little hairy details though. Okay. Which is appropriate for this slide. The ends never justify the means and the devil is in the details. A lot of people misuse that statement, saying that, we don't need to look at the details, like, let's just ignore the details. No, the devil is in the details. The devil wants to, the enemy wants to, we can have the best of intentions, but the enemy wants to distract us in our intention and in the circumstances, or misdirect us about the object. And so when we're looking at morality, we should dig. We should look at the details. We should bring it all to light. This is important. Okay? All right. Let's talk about human conscience. And then we're good to go. And then we'll take a short break. And then we'll come back to a panel discussion. Okay. My conscience exists. Number one, the Catholic Church teaches that we each have the individual ability to judge rightly for ourselves whether something is good or bad. We do not live in an age of we do live in an age of moral relativism, and the church is trying to kick that out the window. I have the ability, as long as I take responsibility for it. I can't just use it willy-nilly. I have to take responsibility to form my conscience. But I am capable of making a moral judgment about an action and being right about it. I can look at someone and say, what you are doing is wrong. We have that ability, or maybe not even applying it to someone else. Let's remove the other person. I can look at my own action and say, this was right or this was wrong, and be correct in my assessment. Okay, so no moral relativism. I have that ability within my soul, but that ability is a great responsibility and needs to be cultivated and used wisely and carefully. So, everyone is given a conscience. This is like the moral yardstick, if you will, to measure our actions against. We all have this built within us. It takes practice and cultivating to actually be able to use it well and accurately. I can't tell you the number, because this can be dangerous. First of all, for the other person, if you're going around wielding your conscience, trying to beat people up and make them feel bad about actions that they've done, that's not helpful. But I've seen just as many people turn that on themselves and start beating themselves up for actions that they've done instead of just letting it go, or holding themselves to too strict a guideline. So it takes practice to hone this ability. Cooper.
This is a lot of this reminds me of the screw tape letters. That
Yes.
deals with this.
Mm-hmm.
You put a really interesting perspective on this. Like the devil makes sin seem less before you engage in it,
Yes.
and then it even works afterwards.
Yes. That is a very, and he had such great insight. I can't recommend this book enough, The Screw Tape Letters. It's a simple read. You can read, fantastic book. But the devil, and this is true, the enemy makes it so that up until we do the thing, it doesn't seem that bad. It's like, yeah. And then I think we can all resonate with this in our human experience. That up until we actually do it, it's just like, yeah. Or we don't even think that we could do it. Just like, oh, I would never do that. Oh, I would never do that. And then all of a sudden you find yourself doing it because you weren't paying attention. And then, afterwards, what happens? You have a crippling guilt that this sin is now unforgivable. That there is no mercy for you. That you are the only colossal screw-up in the world. You are the only one that could have ever done something like this. And so, the enemy works in extremes. Like using one extreme or the other. This is nothing, don't worry about it. Or this is everything and this has now crushed your life. God's right there in the happy middle saying, please don't do that. That's really bad for you, but my mercy is there for when you do it. God's right there in the happy middle. He's not going to sit there and say, don't worry about your sins. It's not such a big deal. He's like, no, these were a big deal. You just burned your hand on the stove with a 3rd-degree burn. We got to get you to the ER and patch you up. He's not going to ignore your sin and make it into nothing. But at the same time, he's not going to say, well, we got to amputate that burned arm now. It's not one extreme or the other with God. Okay, so everyone has a conscience. The human conscience follows natural law a little bit. This is why you can see across societies and cultures all over the world that we have the same basic laws. Stealing someone else's wife is a bad thing. Stealing someone else's cattle is a bad thing. Lying under oath is a bad thing. Worshipping false gods is a bad thing. Trying to think of other, killing people is a bad thing. Those are pretty much the most fundamental societal codes that are across every culture, unless anyone can think of any other ones. Yeah. Okay. So how do Catholics form their conscience then? First of all, the biggest one, the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments form the foundation for our conscience. And so, if you don't have them memorized, I encourage you to. This should be something that every Catholic, every Christian for that matter, should just know the 10 Commandments off the top of their head. If you start looking at different Christian groups or Catholic groups, you will start seeing that there's a different numbering for the 10 Commandments. Don't let that worry you. They're all the same. Just how they order them is sometimes different depending on who you talk to. But the nuts and bolts are all the same. The numbering doesn't matter. They're all there. So, and the numbering depends on which part, because the 10 Commandments are listed in 2 different places, and it depends on which one they reference. So that's where the difference numbering comes in. It's irrelevant for forming my moral life, what number commandment I'm breaking. I just know that I'm breaking a commandment. That's bad. So, the 10 Commandments, followed by the teachings of Jesus. Jesus elaborates on the 10 Commandments and gives us more moral teachings, as do the apostles in Paul's letters. These form our conscience about good and bad things. It's almost like your parents telling you when you're a kid, don't touch the light socket, that's going to be bad. They start forming you before you even know how electricity works, that this is bad. And then eventually you grow up and you're like, oh yeah, I'm completing a circuit, that's going to be bad for my body. That's the point of the rule structures that are found in the Bible. It's God teaching us as a child, and then we come to understand them in a deeper way later. Oh, coveting my neighbor's wife, that's bad. Okay. As I grow into an adult, I realize, yeah, now I know why that's bad. God doesn't ask for blind following of the rules any more than a parent asks for blind following of the rules when they're establishing their household. But what does every good parent do once the rules are established and the kids grow in understanding? They start to explain the rules and why they work and how they work. And God does the same for us. He doesn't keep us in darkness unless we choose to sit there and be like, I don't like that rule, I'm not learning about it, which is a lot of the world, actually. I don't like that rule, I'm not learning about it, I just know that I don't like it. And so the Catholic Church, for all of its moral teachings, has actually come up with very detailed descriptions, understandings, teachings on each of the moral codes that we follow. And it's beneficial to look them up and to understand where the church is coming from. The Catholic Church takes very seriously our duty to form our conscience. As you, in some of the looser examples that I gave, if I have a poorly formed conscience, I can sit there and wield that poorly formed conscience and start telling people that they're going to go to hell for a certain sin that maybe isn't as bad as it is. Or I start condemning myself, or I start excusing myself from things, saying, oh, that's not really that bad, when actually it's killing me on the inside. And so the duty to form our conscience, first and foremost, benefits us, because then I have knowledge about my own actions and how they're going to affect me, rather than just running around in a room full of light sockets with a metal rod. That's a bad idea. I have knowledge now of what's good and what's bad, and I can actually change my actions accordingly. And then the last thing, I can't stress this enough because this will come up with every single topic in our discussion topics. Our feelings are not our conscience. Just because I feel strongly about something does not make it right. Just because I feel strongly about something does not make it wrong. Our feelings are so easily swayed and so easily changed. They are not our conscience, and they do not determine morality. I may make someone very, very, very sad who is a psychopath and charging into a school that wants to shoot up a bunch of children. He might feel that that is the best thing that will give him euphoria for the rest of his life. I am going to disappoint him and make him very upset and hurt his feelings because he's doing a bad thing. Someone's feelings do not determine the moral goodness or badness of an action. And this is what is most often used to justify people's actions. You know what I'm talking about. This makes me feel good. No, you just need to follow your feelings. Do what feels right for you. No. That is not how our brains should operate, and that is not how we should make judgments. We're better than that. So, all right, questions. I'm going to check here. Questions from any of you. Questions? Yes.
I'm
Jimmy.
stuck at the very beginning
You're stuck in the very beginning. Okay.
about actions.
Yes.
There are some actions I find it very difficult to separate the action from the person.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again.
He finds it difficult to separate some actions from the person.
Okay.
I mean, something, child abuse.
Yes.
How do you separate that?
When you are the abused, it is very hard. And that's what therapy and counseling are for. And an overload of grace. That's another thing. Forgiveness, so now here's the other thing. This is kind of like the flip side. So someone does a morally bad action to you. Jesus tells us we need to forgive them. Well, that's nice. That's a very nice thought. Forgiveness is something of God, and we need to remember that only God can give us the grace to forgive. That forgiveness is something that is superhuman, that is extraordinary, something that is supernatural, and so is therefore a grace. The ability to forgive is a grace. And forgiveness is simply separating the person from the action and still being able to love the person in spite of their action and wish they're good. That does not mean, forgiveness, can't clarify this enough, forgiveness does not mean letting the person back into your life. It does not mean that at all. It does not mean that you allow the abuse or whatever it is to continue. But forgiveness over a long period of time, the completion of forgiveness is being able to love the person in spite of the action. Sometimes forgiveness, true forgiveness and true reconciliation does not happen this side of heaven. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Complete forgiveness. God asks that we try. But the completion of forgiveness, God completes that work in us as long as we're moving in that direction.
That can happen internally too.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the other person. It could just as easily be yourself.
Yeah, forgiving yourself of an action as well.
There's a like, say for example, if you think that because you killed somebody that therefore that always and eternally makes you a murderer, you confess your sins. Like, yeah, maybe for that moment in time, yeah, you were a murderer or you were a killer. But if God says, I forgive you of your sins, like Dismas on the cross, the last time I was here, we talked about Dismas on the cross. And we call him the good thief. But I don't know that Dismas is up in heaven and God's calling him, hey thief, reminding him of his sin,
Yeah.
of that particular act every single time. It goes back to the very beginning of this. How do you separate? I think it goes back to you are a child of God and therefore you are created in the image and likeness of God. First and foremost, that is who you are, eternally. And so, what you did in whatever moment in time in this life, yeah, maybe a different term could have been applied to you. Maybe at that moment you were a murderer, you were an adulterer, you were a thief. But when God forgives you, He doesn't say, thief, I forgive you. He says, my son, my daughter, my child. So to me, that's how people can, because I'll be honest with you, that's whenever I come out of confession, and I'm saying some of the same sins, and even though it's good that I'm not saying different sins every single time, but I'm like,
going into confession.
oh! Every single time, I'm just like, oh, I'm really sorry. It's the same one I told you last time. But God's not in there poking you in the chest going, you're a terrible kid. He's saying, where does it hurt? Is it here? Is it here? Where does it hurt? My child. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it takes incredible grace to be able to separate the person from their action. Because so much of our identity truly is tied up with our actions. We really do. It takes incredible grace. For example, this happened a couple months ago. I had an adoration holy hour, and I was exhausted. Some stuff was going on at work. I was fed up with work. Stuff was going on in my personal life. I was fed up with my personal life, and I was just this bundle of going into like an hour long of prayer time, and I was just drained. I felt like I had nothing to give God, nothing. And I'm sitting there, and I had like my books, I had my journal, I had my prayer book, and I'm like, God, I just don't have anything to give you. I have nothing to give you today. And I heard so clearly, you don't have to give me anything, right? You can just be. You don't have to do anything for me. And that, I think, it touches on the fact that in that moment, God was calling me to separate myself from my actions and just to see that me without my actions was enough. Just me being there was enough. I didn't have to do anything for God. And so that touches on like that tendency in the human person to make our actions and what we do and how we fill our lives and my occupation, my hobbies, my gifts, my talents, all of these things that I do become my identity. But my identity, who I am, is so much more fundamental than what I do. And God, in grace, slowly strips those things away, those lies that we believe ourselves, because what happens if I think that I'm good at something and then I fail? I then make that my identity. I'm a failure. Or I'm not enough, or I'm a burden. Like all of these other things that we make our identity, and God slowly has to strip those away, and so that we see ourselves that way, and then we're able to see the other that way. It's when we start seeing ourselves as God sees us, inherently good without having to do anything. that I can start looking at the other and say, okay, if God sees me this way and I can begin to see a sliver of this in my life, maybe that's true for the people around me as well. Maybe. And then you just kind of grasp onto that thought and you keep bringing it to prayer, and God slowly strengthens. Like, that's the beauty of prayer, is that these beautiful thoughts that you have, God strengthens them in prayer and makes them the reality. It's not even that he makes them the reality. They are the reality, and in prayer you are conforming to that reality. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 7:53. And at that time, Carlos and I will be up here, and we will just, we have the discussion topics listed on the handout. We're going to go through each one of those. If you guys feel strongly about any one particular topic, let us know, and we can start there. They're in no particular order. And if there are any topics that are missing, please take a look at the discussion topics and write down any other ones that you want us to cover and bring them up. We'll just use the second half of the class just as like a free discussion. So, okay. Carlos and I are going to tag team this next one. I was hoping that Father Mason was going to be here to help out, but he had other obligations, which is fine. So,
Sorry, this is gonna come up.
yeah. Okay, so there are too many topics on the discussion topics for us to cover all of them tonight. We can spend more time in a future class if you guys feel strongly about this, but also all of these are truly a quick Google search away about what the Catholic Church actually teaches about each of these topics. If you want good resources, I have a lot of good resources. If you want articles online, I can find you articles online. I can find you different videos about each of these topics. So if you want more resources about any of these topics to hear from more than just me or more than just Carlos, that's totally fine. You will not hurt my feelings at all.
It hurt my feelings a little bit.
We're not about
So, online attendees, I don't know if you have the list open in front of you. It's on the Google Drive. But looking at it, is there any particular one topic that you want to tackle first? Or do you just want me to go through them in order that they're listed?
Seems like the church is really obsessed with sex, or it's a big thing.
All right, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. It seems like the church is upset with sex.
Obsessed.
Wait, obsessed with? or
Upset. I heard upset.
I've been obsessed, but
Obsessed. Well, obsessed and upset. Like, let's say both.
well,
Like,
compared to other religions, it focuses on it quite a bit, right?
mm-hmm. So I want to break down, before we start talking about, we talk about this more in the marriage class. We talk about human sexuality there, and especially sexual sins. But let me give you the quick version of the church's understanding of the human body and our role of being an embodied soul and how that relates to other people, because then that clears up a lot of, it may not make you agree with the church teaching, but at least you know where the church is coming from, okay? So step one, God created them in the beginning, male and female. This is a very bodily reality, and we cannot separate our biology from who we are. This is the church's understanding of the human person, that we cannot separate our biology from who we are. When you start to, that causes a whole lot of internal turmoil and a whole lot of problems for the individual going through that struggle of trying to separate their physical, biological reality from who they are. I am not my actions, but all of my actions have to take place in this. So this determines all of my actions. My body determines every single action I do. My body is how my soul is expressed. It is therefore treated with absolute reverence. Every single person's body is their vehicle for their soul and how they're going to get to heaven. Therefore, every single person's body is consecrated and holy. Because that is their personal vehicle that God gave them to achieve salvation. So it's not a rejection of the body or the body is bad. It is that the body is this good. A lot of people don't see the body that way. I've got a little bit too much chub, I've gone a little bit gray, I've got, the limp in my leg from my Achilles tendon surgery back in my late 20s. Like, my body's not perfect. But my body is, Scripture calls it the temple of the Holy Spirit. So, that God gave me my biological structure. And that my biology is not just an accidental happenstance to who I am. My biology serves a function. And when I don't act according to that function, or I abuse a function of my body, something is going to go wrong, or something is going to get hurt. That may not be a physical hurt, it might be a spiritual hurt. But if I abuse my body, I do not use it correctly. If I abuse my own body, and do not recognize the fact that it is meant to function in a specific way, it will get hurt. My body is not meant to suddenly stop after going a really high speed. If I don't respect that physical law of my body, I am dead in a car accident, or dead when I jump off a cliff. My body, a woman's body, is biologically built to give life. If she does not respect that within her, that reality, that my biological makeup is made for children, if I don't respect that in any capacity, something will go wrong. And something or someone, myself or people around me, or both, will get hurt. A man's biological function is to help create life. If he does not respect that and understand that, something will get hurt and something will go wrong. This is where the church is coming into play. It's looking at the science of our bodies. Our bodies are meant to function this way. And when we misuse them, things go wrong. So it's not an obsession. It's an obsession with sex because, breaking it down to another level, the fundamental desire of the human heart is to be known and to be loved. And to know and to love. And that is concretely expressed in our bodies. When we truly love someone with our whole heart and everything that we are, we typically marry them and we give them our bodies. And so that is the highest expression and one of the deepest expressions of love. And often that our bodies are then misused for things that feel like love. This is why I hammered on feelings are not our conscience earlier. There are many things out there that feel like love or come close to love, or are an expression of love, but then we express it imperfectly with our bodies, and then we end up misusing our bodies, and then someone gets hurt.
So one of the things that I'd like to point out, and to help emphasize the importance of the body. So if you have a Bible in front of you, look at John chapter 1, verse 14, and just read the first couple of words.
It's a race to the finish. Who can get there first?
The Gospel of John. So if you're in the near beginning, then you got to go a little further back, because that's Genesis. So
John
1:14.
1:14.
Yep.
Want me to read this out loud?
yeah,
And the Word became flesh.
boom.
Dwelt among us.
That's it. The first couple of words, right? The Word became flesh. The body is so important that God himself says, I will become body too. That's how important this gift is. And it's funny, I don't think that the church is obsessed with sex. It only appears that way because the world is obsessed with it and we have to answer back with the correct answer. If the world didn't say and keep on pressing the issue of, you got to allow this, when are you going to change your teaching on this? Or members of the church just going, well, screw it. Post-Vatican II, I thought contraception was okay. We can condom it up. If the vast majority of our people would have understood the importance of the law of the gift of the human body, then we wouldn't have to continue reminding. But because we keep on moving further and further away from the church is always having to call us back, sometimes with a louder voice, depending on how far we are away from the church. So it's not that we're obsessed. It's not that the church is obsessed with sex. It's that the church understands the value of the marital union between a man and a woman. And it wants to preserve that value to the utmost. And whenever it sees its members, especially its members, straying from understanding and living that value, it is the responsibility of a good parent to tell that child, let me remind you of what this value is. Like one of the most beautiful things that I've ever gotten to do is become a father. And whenever I give my kids a gift, sometimes they're like incredibly expensive gifts, right? If you're ever a parent, or remember your own parent and they would give you a gift. Christmas is coming up, you're going to open up a gift, and some of these gifts you're going to remember for the rest of your life. And then next thing you give your daughter this pearl necklace that you got up in the Middle East, and she's just like bashing it across the wall, or this, that, and the other. I'm like, honey, I'm not obsessed over this pearl necklace, but I know its value. Please, don't do that. That's not how you use that. So it's not necessarily an obsession with it. It's the recognition of the true value of the gift that we've been given. Does that make sense?
Yep. So for those, like the first three on here, you could say, as a secular person, well, these are all like just biological urges, right? So God gave us this sex drive or this urge. Why are we making it a sin?
So the act of having sex itself is not a sin. It's the circumstances surrounding it. The object itself is not bad. Sex itself is not the object. What am I choosing to do? It's not bad. What are my intentions? And that's where it gets hairy. Are my intentions and the circumstances, because then you're choosing an object. What is the object for? What is our sexuality for?
So this is also discussion.
This is the big question. What is our sexuality for? What is the sexual function on my body for? What happens when two people have sex? A baby happens. It is meant for procreation. That is the natural function of my body. That is the object. What's happened in our modern day and age is that we have separated our action from our intention in our body. My sexuality in the world's eyes is no longer ordered towards the love of the other and the procreation of a new child. It is not ordered towards that. My sexuality is an expression of my personal feelings and what I want. Maybe I love this person and I do want to have a sexual relationship with them. But then that ignores the biology of what is my body for. My body is for me to get to heaven and for my spouse to get to heaven if I have a spouse. and for any children to get to heaven. And my body is also for, like, I'm getting into like sexuality just a little bit too much, but I think this is good. We are meant, St. John Paul II quotes this, and he has an entire book called The Theology of the Body, which is a fantastic book, not an easy read. I don't necessarily recommend it blanket. It's actually not on your list of resources here, even though it should be.
Part of it is you put down love and responsibility.
I did put down love and responsibility because Theology of the Body actually doesn't talk about sex at all. Like, it talks about sex twice. Love and Responsibility by Carol Boitiwa, aka John Paul II, that actually talks more about human sexuality and what is an authentic expression of love and what is the responsibility that we carry to the other, to love the other. Like, what is responsible love, in a sense. But what's happened in the modern world, because we have this started with contraception, the biological function of my sexuality is now controlled by me. The sexual act does not mean procreation anymore, according to the world. I can control it with a little piece of plastic or some chemicals in my body. And therefore, I have now subverted my body. I've actually abused my body. My body is now not functioning the way it should. The church calls contraception an abuse because I am now not using my body according to its function. Clarification, though, we are very clear on this. Just because the church does not promote contraception does not mean that the church therefore promotes the opposite end and says that every woman must be barefoot pregnant in the kitchen for the rest of her childbearing years. That is not the case. The church never says every woman needs to have 10 children. No, not that at all. But sexuality is meant to be free and good because, going back to John Paul II, I kind of got off on a little tangent there. There's a Vatican II document called Gaudium et Spes that talks about man only finds himself when he gives a sincere gift of himself. So when I make a gift of myself to the other, that is when I discover who I am. And that self-gift happens most profoundly in the loving relationship between a husband and a wife, and mirrors most closely the exchange of self between the persons in the Trinity. That exchange of self, to be truly loving, should be uninhibited on every level. You should be holding nothing back from your spouse. And because it is so complete, it carries what John Paul II says, a spousal nature. You now become committed to that person because you have given them everything. That is the most authentic call of love, to give them everything, holding nothing back. And the church clarifies this is even your fertility. You hold nothing back.
So what are the first three, by the way?
Sex before marriage, pornography, masturbation.
All right, so let's go down the specifically address those since. So that's one of the things, right? Sex before marriage. I'll be honest with you. Talking about conscience and being formed. When I was a kid, so I grew up in the Catholic Church, but coloring books for catechism just didn't do it for me, and so my sex ed was whatever I learned in gym class, and my father putting in a tape, yes, a VHS, of a movie called Porky's. So for those of you who don't know what Porky's is, it's a stag film or a slightly pornographic film. So that was how my conscience was formed to understand sex. I want to say that one of the lines that I said as a 4th grade child was, "When do I get laid?" So in that regard, it became an expectation. And then fast forward some years, and it's like around 2000, I want to say, and one of the movies that came out at the time was American Pie. And American Pie, for those of you who are old enough to have watched it, it was really about adolescents pursuing that same goal. But none of that leads to this. None of that really leads to this. So because the object itself is bad, because premarital means literally, I want to use your body as a receptacle for something of me, maybe, or just use your body for my own pleasure. That's what premarital sex is. It's not really saying that you love that person. The only thing that you recognize in that other person's value is the warmth of their body. So premarital sex, that's why it's bad, is because you don't see the other person as a person. You only see that other person as an object.
Couldn't you still do that after marriage too, though?
Absolutely you can.
Yes.
Absolutely you
So
can.
how does marriage make that different?
So marriage makes that different as a married man myself with 4 kids. One of the things that helps keep that from being that is that openness to procreation.
Could you do that without marriage before then?
No, because here's one of the understandings of being open. It's not just this. The sacramental union is way different than I have strong feelings for you. And here's, did I ever tell you guys how I originally got married? So, again, I wasn't a super practicing Catholic, right? I was baptized in the church, coloring books, Porkies. Fast forward a few more years, and I meet a girl. And I fall in love with this girl. Strong feelings. I was already in the Air Force at the time, a young lieutenant, and I asked her to marry me. And even my understanding of what that marriage was still had, prenups? What is it, prenups?
Yeah, prenuptial agreement.
So
which
this
the
is-
church condemns, by the way.
Definitely not a practicing Catholic. So I wanted an escape clause, because to me, marriage wasn't forever. So we get married I say quote unquote married in Vegas. 3:36 a.m. I want to say, because she likes to remind me whenever it comes due for our anniversary. So in the middle of the night, we get married. And it wasn't until I reached Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. So for anyone who's ever been to North Dakota, imagine North Dakota but more north. It's about 30 minutes away from the Canadian border. And I meet a super old Catholic priest named Father Stan from Poland. And he learns that she and I got married in Vegas. So we weren't attending Mass as Catholics because we weren't receiving communion. We just needed somewhere to sit on Sunday for an hour so that we could pretend to be good people. And so Father Stan, whenever we're filing out and he's shaking our hands, he asked me, "Carlos, are you married?" I was like, "Yes, Father." Maybe at the natural level, but on the truly supernatural level that we are called to live, we weren't married. She and I were definitely not open to life. Whatever unity that she and I were achieving, were completely just at the emotional level, maybe mental, at as much as we could achieve at 22 years old. But that's the difference. Even though the ministers of marriage are the husband and the wife, having the church say in the presence of God, because that's what it is, it's an oath that you're saying in front of God, that I am willing to give myself totally and completely to this woman who is willing to receive me totally and completely, and she repeats the same, is way different than just having a romantic relationship that is committed. When you are telling God, "So help me God," and you're entering into that covenantal, so covenant, here's one of the words that would stop. Covenant comes with a price. There's like curses that are associated to the covenant when you break the covenant. There's nothing really associated to marriage when you get divorced other than maybe an alimony. And that's not the same thing as eternal damnation. I promise. So that's one of the reasons why it's not the same. Premarital sex is wrong for that reason, because the end isn't what the intention, the original design was for. For a man and a woman to give themselves totally and completely. And we see that in the book of Genesis. Not primordial, what's the proper word? Our original parents, the original human beings. They weren't even able to do that, really. They didn't have that understanding. They didn't trust God and what He was saying, and that's why they disobeyed God. So this is one of the aspects, too, is the unitive and procreative aspect of marriage is huge when it comes to understanding even premarital sex. And it's tough. It's tough because of this. When I came back to the Catholic Church, I knew I was going to have to change my life. You ever remember the parable, but the story of the rich young man? The rich young man goes up to Jesus and asks him, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to do that. And the rich young man was like, nope, not right now. This is probably one of the hardest things to do when we talk about, especially to dudes, premarital sex, or the last one, masturbation and pornography, calling the elephant in the room. Not saying that women don't experience struggles with it too, but I assume that it's just mostly men. When you're called to completely overhaul your life and the habits that you've cultivated, bad habits included, boy howdy. That's Jesus going, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to do this, and every single time you say no, you're just like the rich young man who's like, not today, and then you walk away from Christ. And it's sad, because we all do it. That's where that moral relativism comes in. You're choosing your will over God's will because for somehow, some way, you convinced yourself that that's what God truly wants for you. I remember when I think I was here last time, talking about prayer. Like I literally remember on one occasion, praying to God for me to let this gal have sex with me. That's a stupid prayer. I was a stupid kid. But I convinced myself that if God didn't want me to have this girl, He would have never put this girl in front of me. If God didn't want me to have this girl, He would have never put these urges in me. I convinced myself that that's what it was. And that's just not the way it's supposed to go. You're not looking at the other as other. You're not willing the good of the other person. Because if you were, then you'd be able to say, for the rest of my life, I dedicate myself to you. Through sicknesses and health, through good and bad, through all of that. How many times with the premarital sex partners that anybody has had, that's the intention of it? Let's be honest with ourselves, right? You don't go climbing into a bed with a pretty gal or a handsome dude and going, from this moment on, for the rest of our lives, I'm willing to wipe your butt when you can't do it for yourself. I'm willing to and by the way, that's a reality later down the road, and sometimes sooner for some.
Can I jump in on that actually just a little bit? From a woman's perspective, there are many women that when they engage in the sexual activity before marriage, that is what they're thinking. That is what they want. They want the forever, and so they give their body, but the man does not. And it goes both ways. It goes both ways. But then all of a sudden there is a fundamental miscommunication. The woman is giving more, and the man is giving less. And I'm only speaking from not from personal experience, but from experience of having worked with so many women through this particular struggle. The desire to have the man commit, and so she gives more. But then the man does not give it as much. Or there's, she gives more bodily, but then she doesn't give more emotionally. Or vice versa. In marriage, what the church is calling towards in marriage is, I am committing to you for the rest of my life, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, because I see in you someone that I want to get to heaven with, and because I love you so much, I desire your salvation. And therefore, I need to give you all of me so that you can get there, and you need to give yourself to me so that I can get there too. And so that is the marriage covenant. And the last thing that is given is the body that completes the covenant. In church law, in church legal structure, a marriage is not completed until the married couple have sex on their wedding night. The sacrament is not finished. And so there is a beautiful sacramental dimension to the sexual act. And that is what the church is trying to preserve. It's trying to protect people prior to marriage from giving too much of themselves to someone who doesn't want it, or giving too much of themselves to someone who's not willing to commit all the way. That I love you so much that I even reverence your body. That I'm going to sleep with you, make love to you, not just have sex with you. That this is something that is now sacramental. This is now something that is sacred and beautiful. And something that is unitive. Like procreative comes secondarily almost. But the unitive aspect comes first. That the two spouses become united in the action. And it's in that action that their love is complete. And so the church protects that sexuality because how many of us, how many people do you know that have been hurt by sexual encounters? I don't think you have to think very far at all to come up with at least 5 names, if not 10 or 20 or 50. How many people do you know that have been hurt by sexual encounters? I'm not saying that this does not happen in marriage. This is why we have to make marriage a sacrament, because this is hard. It's not easy to live this reality. God needs to flood it with grace to make it so.
Boy, help.
God needs to flood it with grace to make it so. But it is protected more within the marriage covenant. Someone going into marriage with the right understanding of what marriage is and they know their spouse, it's not coming as a surprise down the road. And you're able to give yourself completely because you have the safeguard of a boundary. I can give myself completely because this person has promised to never leave me. If you notice, there's actually a tie-up. You can't actually take one of the sexual moral issues in the church without looking at the rest of them. They all play in harmony together. That if I feel safe and protected within a marriage, I won't need to contracept. I won't ever have to worry about an abortion. Contraception, because in a very real way, the church encourages women and men to understand their wife's body to the point where they know times of fertility and infertility down to the hour because her body gives off signals and signs.
Mucus, a lot of mucus.
Mucus body temperature, a woman's peak fertility date, her body temperature spikes. A woman's bodily fluids change on a month-to-month basis and you can pinpoint down to the day of your fertility. And the Catholic Church says this is your body. Use natural infertility times that are built in. If you don't want to have a kid right now for whatever reason, we'll go into this more, but for sake right now, use the infertility time. It's built into a woman's body. She's not fertile all the time, thank God.
Yeah, you have to get a second job.
Then you really would have women running around with 20 or 30 kids. But we're able to use natural methods. But I don't have a man and a woman that are in a committed monogamous relationship. They don't have to worry about contraception, especially if they're pursuing natural methods. They don't have to worry about abortion because you know what? Even if we do have another child, this person's sticking around with me. I'm not done doing this alone. You don't have to worry about divorce because this person's made a promise and I trust them. And they should trust me because we built our relationship on trust and mutual understanding. Because we took the time to get to know each other first before we got married. Father Rocco, interestingly enough, when he does couples counseling, one of the first questions he asks, when was the first time you had sex? And then he tells them, that is how old your relationship is. If you've been married for 10 years and you had sex 3 months into your relationship is only 3 months old. Because it is a scientifically, psychologically proven fact that as soon as you have sex together, your communication decreases. What you communicate to your significant other decreases. This is independent studies done by groups that are non-religious. Your communication decreases. And your, what are the other skills that decrease? Conflict resolution skills would decrease. Because we can just make up afterwards. We don't actually have to talk about the problem we're having, right? But if sex isn't an option, then you actually have to talk about it. And you have to actually figure out, actually, this is a make or break deal for me. How do you really feel about this? No, I don't want you to just shut me up. We need to actually talk about this. Coming from a woman's perspective, you have a much clearer head when sex isn't involved. And you're able to make a better rational judgment of is this my life partner? Is this person good enough? Or is this person fitting for me? I'm able to keep a clear head.
I think
So-
you got something.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add the benefit to the children of like the stable household if there's like that commitment in marriage and you're agreeing to commit to like a life safe environment or like in a family structure for that kid to grow up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the church calls the family the domestic church, so that's why I take my role very seriously as the priest of my household, and that's why any man who has a family and is Catholic should also take that very seriously. A lot of people they turn it into a chauvinism thing, but it's not. Speaking as a man, I think that more men need to step up and be Catholic men. You listed one of the topics there, masturbation. You are not a man just because you can look at a computer screen and work out your forearms. I'm sorry. Like that's like juvenile stuff before you're even well formed in the head. That's reacting to biological urges that are just coursing through your body at the age of 11, 12, and 13 that you still haven't quite shrugged off. That doesn't make you a man. What makes you a man is what Christ shows us. Your willingness to lay down your life for another. That self-donation, that self-gift. Whether that life means ultimate death or whether that life means going to work every day and working and working and working to make sure that your kids have an education, there's food on the table, and a roof over the head. It's that self-donation. There's no self-donation in that act of masturbation. It's self-pleasure. They call it the sin of onin in older catechisms because there's no completion, there's no chance of procreation. It doesn't matter what the gal says about getting pregnant by sitting on a toilet seat. It's not a real thing. When a man or a woman, they engage in self-pleasure, it's self-destruction because they're not able to complete the sexual act the way it was intended. And, oh, by the way, they're exploiting women or men and men.
You're not looking at the other and seeing the person. It's the shame that we talked about with Adam and Eve. They now look at the other and see an object for their gratification. So that's like primarily, but like masturbation can happen with or without images. You don't need them. And so even if it's just something happening in your head, it's still abusing my body. It's revving an engine with a parking brake on.
Terrible thing to do to a car. You're turning your tires bald.
I mean, nothing's going to happen. Nothing happens, like there's no completion of the action because you are by yourself. It is by nature meant to be done with somebody else. So,
What's the other ones on there?
we've run up on time
Oh,
actually.
never mind.
I'm sure this is what everyone wanted to talk about tonight, right?
There's a song about that too. Let's talk about sex, maybe. Let's talk about you and me. Nobody? Nobody? It's like a 90s thing. Never mind. My bad.
Okay, so we didn't get through everything, but maybe what I can do is I can sprinkle in one of these with every class. Like we can talk about a different moral teaching every class. Just so we can get through them. And if you think of any more, please feel free to bring them up to me so that we can talk about them. And if you want more information about any one of these topics, please let me know because I can give you any kind of information that you need. There are so many good resources out there about each and every one of these topics. And yes, the church does have teachings on all of them, but almost all of these are also backed up scientifically, that these are actually harmful for us in one way or another, scientifically, either psychologically, biologically. I mean, the rate of erectile dysfunction because of masturbation is pretty high. Like, that's a scientific fact. So, yeah. Any final questions or comments, thoughts? All right, next week we're talking about heaven, hell, and purgatory. So, we will be, barring a complete and total shutdown by the state, I will continue to teach in person. Feel free to join in online. And then, if you don't feel like you want to come to class, that's fine. Yeah, and everything will be uploaded to my YouTube channel at some point. I'm not super quick about uploading the videos because they take me a little while, and YouTube is slow. So, but all right, we give glory and praise to God as we pray. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.